Good evening and welcome to tonight's special meeting of the board. This meeting is called to order at exactly 5 p.m. Roll call, please.
Ms. Armstrong?
Present.
Dr. L. Hessen?
Here.
Ms. Stewart?
Present.
Mr. Critchfield?
Present. Tonight we do not have requested addressing agenda items. May I ask Mrs. Yola, you help me out. Uyoa, I'm gonna get that. To lead us in the flag salute, please.
Place your right hand over your heart. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a discussion item on the general obligation bond. Mrs. Azevedo.
Yes, good evening. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Ms. Meredith Johnson of Danis, Walliver, and Kelly to provide the board an update regarding the general obligation bond. Consultant Mr. Mark Farrell from Dale Scott and Company has also joined us this evening, just in case we have any additional questions. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, members of cabinet. So we have on, as you may have had a chance to take a look at on the agenda, a draft of a resolution which would place a general obligation bond measure on the November ballot. And I wanted to walk you through the resolution and answer any questions and explain to you its provisions so that if you so chose, we could bring it back to a subsequent board meeting for consideration. So the resolution, the text of the resolution itself is pretty short. It starts off with a bunch of what we call recitals, and they start off with the word whereas. And those tell the story to anyone who's reading it, and of course to the board who is considering it, of the district's need for the measure. It talks about the facilities that need improvements. It talks about some of the accountability measures that are included in a bond measure that I'll explain. And it gives some color behind what is otherwise kind of a technical resolution. That's why we have that there. And then when we go on to the text of the resolution, I'm looking starting at the bottom of page 2, the most important really part of this resolution may be that what we're actually doing is requesting that Los Angeles County hold an election on your behalf, because the district is going to call the election, but it's not going to hold an election. The county would do that for us and place your ballot measure on their ballot in November. The measure would be called under Proposition 39, which is the law under which most school districts call bond elections. And the reason for that is that the voter threshold to approve a bond measure under Prop 39 is 55%. There's an alternative to Prop 39 that requires 2/3. And we have found that 2/3 is a pretty high threshold. 55% is much more attainable. When you call a measure under Prop 39 and receive that 55% voter approval threshold, there are some additional accountability safeguards that are built into every Prop 39 measure. And we describe those on page 4 under section 6. One of the ones that require the most effort on the district's part is the Citizens Oversight Committee. You may be aware that every Prop 39 bond measure requires a group of at least 7 members of your community who will review the expenditures under the bond measure to make sure they are in accordance with the project list, which is also a part of this resolution that I'll talk about in a moment. There are some audits that are required of both the bond fund and the expenditure of projects. That's a requirement of Prop 39. And then the proceeds of the bonds will be held at the county in a separate fund, separate and apart from the district's own general fund, and accounted for independently. That pretty much covers what's contained in the 4 part of the resolution, the technical specifications. When you get to Exhibit A, the exhibits really are the part of the resolution that craft Bellflower Unified's own measure. This is what makes the election unique to your district and what represents your needs for voters. So if you look at Exhibit A, it has a heading that says ballot label. That paragraph is limited. We're going to forward to Exhibit A. A couple more pages. One more. Two more. There you go. So this is the question that voters are going to be asked. You'll see it says yes or no underneath because they're going to vote yes or no. This paragraph, and I'll read it for you so you can hear it, is limited to 75 words, and there's some required language, so only a portion of it really describes specifically your projects. This is intended to be a summary of the measure. It doesn't encompass the entire measure, which can be found on Exhibit B. So with funds that cannot be taken by the state, shall Bellflower Unified School District's measure be adopted to renovate classrooms and facilities for career training, college preparation, improve access for those with disabilities, repair, replace roofs, plumbing and electrical systems, and upgrade school safety security by authorizing $111 million in bonds at legal rates, levying $44 per 100,000 of assessed valuation, $6.8 million annually, while bonds are outstanding, with audits, citizens' oversight, and full disclosure of all spending. By way of explanation, there's a requirement that this measure include the rate of the tax, so that's expressed as $44 per 100,000 of assessed value. The amount of revenue to be raised every year. General obligation bonds for school districts don't actually raise revenue, right? They levy a tax, and the tax gets used to pay the bonds. So in parentheses where it says 6.8 million annually, that's the estimated annual amount of the tax that would be collected. And then the duration of the tax must be included. So the most honest and candid description of how long the tax will be levied is really while bonds are outstanding, right? Because we're going to levy a tax in order to pay the bonds while they're outstanding. It may be 40 years, it may be 50 years. It depends when the bonds are issued and what the term of the bonds is when they're issued, which are things we don't know yet. The answers to those questions are based upon your project needs and your dollar needs when it comes time to issue bonds. Any questions or thoughts on the 75 words?
Colleagues, any questions? I have one. So say for athletic facilities, or anything to do with athletics, would that need to be in the ballot label itself, or can it be in the other part?
Yeah, because this is limited to 75 words, and because we have language that's required to be in there that isn't descriptions of projects, this really is looked at as a summary. And when it comes to deciding if a project is eligible to be funded with bond proceeds, we look at the project list, which can be found on Exhibit B, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Got it.
If you counted these words and you said it looks like more than 75, we get to count proper names as one word. So there's a few funny word count rules that apply.
And I know there's a whole art to it. Squeeze it all in there.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Should we move on to Exhibit B?
Please.
So Exhibit B is what we call the full ballot text. This is the entirety of the measure. And all of Exhibit B will be printed in the sample ballot that voters get mailed to their home that they hopefully will review when they decide how to vote. So the information here really is what we intend voters to use for them to make their informed decision. So it starts off with some findings that we want voters to understand about the district. They mirror the recitals at the beginning of the resolution. We recite those accountability provisions that are required under Proposition 39. And then you'll notice on B2, we get to the bond project list. And that also is a requirement of Prop 39. When you pass a measure by 55% approval of the voters, you have to give them the list of projects on which you intend to spend your bond proceeds and let them review it so they can decide if those are projects that they think it's a good idea for them to pay taxes to fund. So starting in that section 3, that the entirety of this is your project list. We start off by listing the district schools, but it's important to note that in the paragraph above, we do talk about the fact that projects are authorized to be undertaken at all of the district sites, whether they are schools or otherwise. And then you'll see on B3 through B4, we have some specific bullets that are the actual specific projects that are authorized to be funded from bond proceeds. I'll give you a minute to look at that.
Would this be a good time for some questions?
Sure.
Is that okay? Ms. Stewart?
I had one question. On page B4 at the end, I know it talks about replacing, constructing, installing playgrounds. All of our playgrounds are being done with our ESSER funds. Is that something that, are we adding on to what we're already doing?
So a majority of your playgrounds are being replaced. It is listed on there because that would allow for any repairs, if there were repairs, because remember, this bond covers a period of time, so it could assist with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Armstrong, any questions? Dr. O'Hesson?
No.
There's
I'm sorry.
excuse me.
Can you speak to being on the subcommittee? We spoke a little bit about this, but speak to the value of a specificity in this.
Yeah, there's a little bit of tension in the fact that you know what your current project needs are, and it's easy to make a list of those projects. But a bond measure tends to live for 4, 6, 8, 10 years even of project needs. So we want to craft a project that meets the current needs, but then also potentially foresees what your needs could be in the future and what projects might evolve that you're not aware of today, and we plan for that. So not everything that you read here is necessarily a current project on your on your needs list, but it's something that potentially could be something that you might want to fund with bond proceeds 5 years from now. And in terms of specificity, we want to make sure that voters can understand how you're going to spend the proceeds, but at the same time, give you flexibility so that if some condition changes, you have a little bit of room to pivot. And things that I can think of are, for example, if you talk about wanting to install security fencing or gates, we leave it that broad. We don't talk about the kind of gate or the material of the gate, the where you put the gate or where the security fencing is. We just want to make sure you're able to provide secure fencing in the manner that best fits the district at the time when it's time to undertake that project. So we work hard to be clear for voters so they understand how you want to spend the proceeds, but at the same time, allowing the district the ability to undertake the project in a way that best meets its needs and is the most cost efficient.
So for like under B, modernizing, upgrade, renovate for high quality instruction, music and dance. So that leaves it pretty wide open. So if there was a need for like theater seating or auditorium space, like
Right.
it leaves it open enough for that.
Exactly. And actually, a really good example is COVID. You know, the use of outdoor spaces has increased so much since COVID, since we've learned that teaching kids outdoors and outdoor learning spaces are very valuable. We didn't tend to include those kind of projects on project lists before. But now we're adding flexibility so that classrooms don't necessarily mean what happens inside four walls. We can think of a space that isn't inside of a building as a classroom. We want to make sure that we describe educational facilities in a way that allows you to build what is the best educational facility that meets those needs. So so we want to have high quality instruction in music. We don't necessarily know what that facility will look like, but at the time we undertake that project, we will decide what the most high quality facility for a music program might be.
And there's no word limit on this part, right?
No, there's no word limit.
So I know we get pretty specific. My apologies. I know we get pretty specific with some of these, but so I see other athletic facilities, locker rooms, so you really try to cover as much as you can while still keeping it wide open. So it's not like a strict we're doing exactly this, exactly this, exactly this.
Right.
Do we have, from the 2012 bond, do we have that project list?
I'm not sure.
I would have to request a copy of that. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay. Or maybe Dale Scott.
Do you have it?
Yeah. Just at some point, if the board could get that, that'd be great.
Would it be worthwhile to compare them to make sure we've covered everything on that list?
Well, I was able to find like the old bond language, but I couldn't find the exact bond list. But I just think so the board knows kind of like what that looked like back then, and that way we can craft going forward. Any other questions from the board, Dr. Alhessen?
No, thank you.
Ms. Armstrong?
So, so what you're saying is that the project list does not have to be all-inclusive?
I wouldn't phrase it that way, because every time that you want to spend bond proceeds, it is important that you look back at the project list and you identify language on here that describes the project you want to undertake. So it does need to describe how you're spending your bond proceeds. Every project you want to do needs to be listed here. But we leave some flexibility in the way we describe projects so that you don't have to undertake them in a way that is specific to the project list. So I can give you an example, the one you pointed out, Mr. President, where you said, renovate, repair, replace, construct, and or install, and then we list a whole bunch of athletic facilities, including other athletic facilities. So that if what you were doing wasn't a playground, a play surface, a sports field, a gymnasium, or a court, which is what we kind of describe as athletic facilities at the moment, your other athletic facilities language would cover that other athletic facility, for lack of a better word.
Thank you.
I think that's it for questions for the
For Exhibit
moment.
B?
Yeah.
So the last part of the resolution is Exhibit C, the tax rate statement. This also will be printed in the sample ballot that voters get to see when they are learning about the measure. And this provides them some disclosure as to the impact of the measure on their taxes. Paragraph 1 gives the best estimate of the average annual tax rate that's required to be levied to pay the bonds. And you can see here it's $43.87 per $100,000 of assessed value. And as you know, assessed value is the value of property on the county tax rolls. It's not market value. And then it's estimated today that the final fiscal year in which the tax would be collected is 2053-2054. The second paragraph gives the estimate of the highest tax rate, which is $44 per $100,000 of assessed value. And then it also says that we're estimating today that the highest tax rate, that $44, would be levied from 2025-26, so next year, through 2052-53. And then finally, paragraph 3 gives an estimate of the total amount of repayment for if all of the bonds under the measure are issued, and that's $196 million. And of course, we can't predict where interest rates are going, so this is a rough estimate by your financial minds. Using the best information they have as to what they can predict as to where interest rates will be when bonds are issued. So that voters, in addition to understanding the benefits of the measure, they understand that how much they will have to pay for it.
Is that usually pretty accurate, the estimate? Like, so 111 million? I think the last bond, I think, was like 72.
I'm not
or
sure
something.
have you ever compared what your tax rate estimate was to what it actually is? I never have.
A score check?
Typically the tax rates have been lower. The tax rates end up being a little bit lower than estimated, and the total repayment ends up being a little bit lower. If not, initially, you'll have opportunity to refinance the bonds down the road.
Could-
That reduces that.
You look really comfortable, but could you say the exact same thing at the microphone for me? I'm sorry.
So typically, historically, if we look back, I would say the tax rate tends to be a little bit under what is projected. And then the total repayment amount, the total principal and interest also tends to be lower than projected. for example, I think, in the last meeting, we talked about we're using a 4.5% estimate. The current rate's more around 4%. So we try to build in a little bit of conservatism into that number, and then, an under promise, over deliver. And then additionally, like we did with the Measure BB bonds, in '23, we refinanced a portion of those bonds, saved taxpayers $8 million. So that kind of would lower that number in the long run as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, Dr. Sue, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So in regards to item 3, when you're saying that the 196 million would be the total payment on the bond, so that includes $86 million additional cost on the taxpayer. That would include interest and repayment of the bond. Is that correct?
Correct. So the 196 million includes
Right.
the 111 million in principal amount and the 85 million in interest.
Right, so the difference would be around 86 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hessen. Ms. Stewart?
So if the state bond passes and we're able to get the 60/40 or things like that, we don't have to pay any taxes back on that bond. That is just matched money that we could get, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the questions. I think we're good. Thanks.
So the resolution was crafted based on input and surveys of the community, but it is in draft form, so it is, it can be edited. There can be additional thoughts incorporated if there are any, particularly on the ballot label, although I will say that Exhibit A, the ballot label, was drafted specifically based on community feedback. So the projects that are listed here are the projects that voters told us they wanted to see happen, that they felt were valuable, which is why they're on there.
Great. Is that the end of the presentation?
That's all I
at this
have.
point? Any other questions from my colleagues on the board? Ms. Armstrong, go for it.
When you all did the survey, were you able to derive how many renters versus homeowners took the survey?
We didn't conduct a survey. That was done by True North. I don't remember seeing in their presentation a number. They may have those details, but I don't remember seeing that in the presentation that they gave to the board.
Thank you.
Dr. O'Hessen, any last questions?
Thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Stewart?
No, I mean, just my thoughts on the bond are if you put it on the ballot and the voters don't want it, they don't vote for it. And if they do, they do. So I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the, or do you have another? No? Okay. No, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the time and all the effort that goes into this. Like Vice President Stewart said, this is really important for our district and our kids, and especially with those matching. Could you actually take a second and explain the matching funds from the state, please?
Sure. On the November ballot, Proposition 2 has now been qualified for the ballot. And do you know what the total amount of property was? I don't remember. It's in the billions, 11 billion. And it's intended to provide supplemental additional project monies for school districts and community college districts in the state of California. But in order to qualify for it, you have to show that you have local matching funds. So school districts that pass bond measures can use their bond funds as their local match. And you qualify for supplemental monies that, as you pointed out, unlike your own bond funds, which get repaid from a levy of a tax in your district. Those money, the state bond monies that you receive are free. You don't have to pay them back. You just get them like a grant from the state of California. And they can be used to supplement the amount that the voters approved under your local bond measure.
Great, thank you. Thank you for explaining that, because I think it's a very important thing to consider as we go forward. Ms. Armstrong?
Another question. As far as, imagine, okay, I'm trying to formulate this. It's real simple. In order for us to, okay, we get this bond, okay, we put it on the ballot, it passes. Is there a list that we have to get on in order to even qualify to ask for those matching funds?
Yes, it's a process and an application, and it's somewhat involved, but yes, that's correct. It's not guaranteed, but you become eligible for those monies, and it's a matter of the state making them available to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the presentation. Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. No, go for it.
Ms. Lisa, is our staff working on the application process in order for us to get on that list? Because we can have that measure, but we can get this bond, but if we were not on that list, we won't qualify.
I would have to speak with our facilities department, but I do not believe we're working on that yet. Not currently, that I'm aware of.
So the measure for the state is actually on the November ballot, so it has to pass first. If
Exactly.
Proposition 2 passes, then school districts can get in line to receive the funds underneath Proposition 2. But at the moment, all of the state bond monies have been expended.
What would you say the projection is? Is it likely to pass?
I don't know. You know, Mark?
You got to tell the future for a second.
I believe the articles I saw prior to the legislature putting it on the ballot is that the polling was favorable. It only needs 50% to pass at the state level. And so I think the polling was above 50%, and that kind of encouraged the legislature to actually go ahead and put it on the ballot. And then with those matching fund applications, you typically kind of have to identify a project. So if it's, let's say modernizing a certain school site, so you put together the application specifically for that particular school site. You need some additional details about that, and you put in that application for that project. And so, your facility department and consultants would kind of come up with, when you need to apply for those various different projects.
Great, thank you. Vice President Stewart?
Again, just to clarify, I understand, but just to clarify again for our public, if we don't put this bond on the ballot and the state passes, the only other way we can do it is to use our general funds, our own money, rather than the bond money, correct?
That's correct. You must have a local match.
Correct. Thank you.
And I already know the answer to this, but how much does the state give us for facilities? How much of our budget is allocated just for facilities?
I'm going to defer that to Mr. Smith here, to Dr. Smith, and see if he's got an answer for you.
Generally speaking, the state doesn't allocate any money specifically for facilities. We are allocated certain funding amounts. For example, a general fund, which can go to facilities, but in terms of a direct revenue source from the state for the specific purpose of preparing or repairing facilities, building facilities, there isn't a revenue stream directly for that specific purpose
Got it.
from the state.
To add on to that answer, local bonds are the regulatory scheme that the state of California uses to fund capital improvements for school districts. The state doesn't fund capital projects. It expects at the local level for each district to pass a bond measure to fund capital improvements. Yeah, that's under the California law, that's the regulatory scheme for funding these kinds of improvements or bond measures.
Got it. Thank you. Ms. Armstrong?
I have a question. I have a response.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Dr. O'Hesson?
No, I just want to make sure you see my hand raised.
I don't.
Go ahead,
but-
Renita.
All you, Dr. Sue. Go for it.
Okay. I just have recent data from CSBA that voters have not passed a state school facilities bond since 2016, which provided $9 billion for K through 12 schools and community colleges. The last proposed bond was for $15 billion and failed 4 years ago, with 53% of the voters rejecting it. The state's current pool of school facilities bond money is running out. So Proposition 2 would help reduce outstanding state bond waiting list of more than 170 school projects, totaling $3.4 billion in bond money requests.
Thank you for that, Dr. Sin. I think that's a great point. Even if the state doesn't fund, we want to make sure that we have some funds for our facilities. Vice President Stewart. I'm sorry, Ms. Armstrong. Vice President Stewart.
No, I just wanted to reiterate that thank you for that information, but at the end of the day, the voters get to vote. So if they don't want the bonds, they vote no and they don't pass. I don't understand what the problem is putting it on the ballot and letting our voters vote. If we don't put it on the ballot, we make the decision for them. If we put it on the ballot and they vote yes or no, at least they get to make the decision, and that's where I think it should be, is in our community members' hands on what they want to do. So again, I think it would be a big mistake to not put this on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Stewart. Ms. Armstrong?
You know, I initially I had the same thoughts as my colleague here. However, we know sometimes things pass because voters really don't read, sometimes. But you mentioned something about 5 years from now, you know, like, okay, it's in 4 years. I mean, if we don't do this now, when do you think the next opportunity, the next window? It could be 4 years, the next main election, right? Which would give us a lot more answers, because I don't see the rush. And if we put it on the ballot, yes, we're going to have the pros and the cons, and all that kind of stuff. But why rush? Because we can do a lot of the homework and have that list ready. A lot of things we could be more prepared in 4 years. So that's just me. But I had that same sentiment.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Did you want to respond to that?
I was just going to let you know the next opportunity after November is in 2026.
So 2 years and not 4.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. And just if I could just a follow-up. Are bonds more likely to pass, say, on a presidential election or a gubernatorial?
Yes, so statewide, going back the 20 years that Prop 39 has been in action, about 90% of school bonds pass in a presidential election, about 80% pass in a gubernatorial. And I believe this still holds true, but I think in LA County, I believe every school bond that's been on a presidential ballot has passed as a Prop 39 bond.
Great. Thank you very much. Vice President Stewart.
I had a follow-up question for you. Either of you, but if the bond passes in 2024, are you saying they'll put another bond in 2026 right back on the ballot for as much money? Is that what we're saying?
I'm sorry, so you're asking about the state bond?
My colleague asked when the next bond would be on the ballot, and you said 2026. But if this one passes in 2024, there will be no 2026, correct?
Correct. So legally, for a Prop 39 bond, school districts can only ask on regularly scheduled elections. So basically every 2 years and even year elections.
Right. So if it didn't pass, we may see it in 2026. But if this passes this year, it's not going to be on the ballot in 2026.
But
No, the state bond. If the state bond passes, you're saying they'll have another one on the ballot in 2026? Correct. Can you come explain that? Because I think that was a little bit ambiguous. There will not be another state bond on 2026 if this one passes in 2024, correct?
It's highly unlikely because they'd
Right.
be doing the work of passing out the money under the 2024 state bond.
Correct. So if we miss out on this opportunity and it passes this year, we don't get to do this again probably for many years, correct?
If you don't pass a measure in 2024, passing one in 2026 might make you too late to access those 2024 state bond monies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And you're the experts here. We're paying you guys to be the experts. Do you agree, or do you have a recommendation for us going for a bond? Do you think that we should be putting a bond on the ballot, yes or no?
I think that's up to you. I think it depends on your needs and your community. I think your community is the ultimate arbiter of whether they want a measure or not, as you mentioned.
But again, you've basically stated that there's not really any money for these types of things unless you go for these types of general obligation bonds for facilities, correct?
Correct. And if you don't go in 2024, your next opportunity is in 2026.
Correct. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Thank you, Vice President Stewart. Okay. Any other? Ms. Armstrong, you still have a question? Good. Cool. Thank you again. And I do agree with some of the hesitation. I'm not really usually in favor of taxes, but I think like a lot of people, when you have, if you're going to pay taxes, when they stay local and they're for our kids and for our community, it's the best place to pay them. And if I could, that any tax that is paid for this bond has to be used for this purpose, right? For our schools, for our kids, for our community. Any other questions before we close out the meeting?
Are we still open for discussions or
Ms.
just
Armstrong?
questions for the?
Ms. Armstrong?
It's still open, Dr. Seuss. She'd asked a question, yeah, President. She'd asked a question. How many more years do we have to pay on that last bond?
I think that'd be a good question for flipping through the notes there.
It's coming up soon.
I believe the information was in our presentation.
2041 is the final payment on
2041.
Measure BB.
Yeah, 2041.
Thank you.
It's a lot of taxes. It's a lot of taxes.
Can I?
I totally agree with you. I'm a homeowner here in Bellflower too, and I don't want to pay taxes, but it's $220 a year. I can spend $40 on valet in Vegas on a weekend. I mean, honestly, like $220 a year for our kids, I think we should be letting our community members decide what they think. It's not really up to us. All it's up to us is, do we put it on the ballot? But our community gets a chance to voice their opportunity, or their opportunity to voice how they feel. And $220 a year for kids, I don't have a problem with that as a homeowner here in Bellflower.
Thank you, Vice President Stewart. Ms. Armstrong?
We're going to be closing out pretty soon, so
Yes,
because
ma'am.
I've been looking at this for a while, and if you have multiple properties, it's not a walk in the park if you have multiple properties. And again, what is the urgency for putting this on the ballot right now when we have other work that we could be doing to prepare? Have we, as a board, I don't think we've given you direction to do a full assessment, right? But what about the other resources that are available? I get emails all the time inviting, us to, apply for bonds or apply for grants and scholarships. I get that information all the time, and if I get it, I know everyone else gets it. So I think we should really do a full assessment of resources before we go out and ask the community to support us. And as the elected officials, it is our responsibility to be fiscally responsible for the needs of our district, just like we would in our own house. And, we need to plan for the future and make the changes as needed. And we really, really need to look at how we can repurpose funds. We have declining enrollment, and how are we addressing that? Have we assessed what savings we would have if we would repurpose one of our schools, or even have to close it, because we do have declining enrollment? And I don't even know how our classes are going to be looking next year. Okay. This decision that we're going to make is going to impact our community for years to come, in addition to what we already have. And if you have multiple properties, that's not fun because it's going to go down. It's going to trickle down to the renters. That's how it goes. When you raise the salary at Chick-fil-A, they raise the prices. Okay. I really would like staff to first give us options and let us determine the real priorities. I know we have a lot of stuff, but really define the priorities that might bring cost savings options for us. You know, we need to take what we have and try our best to try to create some revenue. We're just putting out monies. We're just putting out a lot of money and salaries and everything, and new positions and everything. You know, we really need to evaluate these things, at least for me, because it's going to be a burden for a person who has multiple properties. I'm sorry, because it's a lot of bonds, a lot of taxes coming up. And I'm serious, Amy. I thought just like you, just put it on there and let the voters decide. That was my attitude. But
Honestly, it should be. What's the harm to it?
Well, what's the harm in waiting also?
But why wait? There's not another state
We are
matching
very
bond right now. Ms. Acevedo, have you ever seen anything come across your desk where you can get $200 million in grants for facilities? Have you ever seen that in your tenure in a district? Dr. Smith, have you ever seen that? $200 million in monies for facilities that are for our kids? And I'm sorry, if you have multiple properties, then double it. Now you're paying $400 a year. If you have multiple properties with renters, I'm pretty sure I've seen the rent here in California. You can afford $400 in property taxes.
Well,
So,
again,
But again,
I don't
it
have.
should be up to the voters. It should not even be up to us. It should be up to the voters to decide what they want to do.
Colleagues, that's, Ms.
again-
Armstrong,
Again, I don't
finished.
have all the information, you know, and I'm not ready to ask our local constituents for funding either. Okay, so right now, for me, it's not the right time. There's more
So-
work for us that needs to be done
Colleagues-
before we place the burden on the community.
I just want to be very
That's
clear.
it.
We're not voting on that right now. We're not discussing that right now. It's discussion on the ballot language. Sure, more discussions can still be had, and I appreciate the thoughts, and I think that there's some points there. I happen to share the view that voters do read, and they will make informed decisions, and I trust the community, and I think it's one of the most important investment a community can make is in their schools, and also when it comes to bonds and how much we owe on the last bond. I did do some research before the meeting, and when it ranks all of the districts around us, we are, I believe, the lowest, right? Or it's maybe second, but I think it's lowest. Do you have that data for me? Because I think it's important, because that is a really good point, Ms. Armstrong.
President Critchfield, if you don't mind me interrupting, I'm so sorry, but I
Sure.
also want you to know that Dr. Sewell Hassan has had her hand up
thank
for a little
you.
bit here.
Sure. Let me have this response, then I'll go right to Dr. Sue. Thank you for waiting.
Sure. I know we had the presentation up earlier, but it's on slide 4, the presentation we went through at last meeting, and yes.
Could we pull that up, please?
So it's, yes.
Because I think
Slide 4 of this
I think it is
presentation.
important, because I mean, you see, say what Downey's been able to do with their district and the investment that community has made in their district. They passed 2 much larger bonds, and their work is really showing for it. But even bonds, even from what Ryan said earlier, that is how you are able to improve your schools, and I think our community deserves improved schools like these other ones. But maybe I could hand it off at that point.
Yeah, so we went and pulled for this current or last fiscal year now, 23-24, the tax rates of some of the unified school districts surrounding and in the area, and yes, You can see Bellflower down at the bottom of the list at $44 per 100,000. Downey around 130 or so dollars per 100,000. Long Beach up over $180 per 100,000. So those are all districts that have had multiple bond measures, taken multiple bond measures to their communities over the past 20 years and have had those measures pass.
Great, thank you. And I will say, one of the duties we have as school board members is to make the best decisions for our kids in our schools, in our community, and the residents. And I'm one of them. I'd be paying some taxes too, as a homeowner here in the district. But that's for everyone to make that decision. And I believe most people will see it as a great investment. But our role here as a board is to get resources to our kids so we can fulfill the mission of this district. And that's what I believe we should do. Dr. Al Hessen, you've been waiting patiently, and I appreciate that. I'll kick it over to you, and then I'll go to Vice President Stewart.
Thank you. I wanted to mention there are other sources. Recently, Assemblyman Rendon donated $1.2 million for the Student Center at Cerritos College. Also, Assemblywoman Blanca Pacheco donated over $750,000. What I'm trying to say is that there are funds out there without burdening our taxpayers. You're talking about an additional 40 years, which would mean generations would be paying off the debt. So students who we're trying to support will be burdened also with this debt if they're staying in Bellflower or in the Lakewood community. So that's one thing I wanted to mention and also to keep in mind. You were all assuming that this state bond is going to pass. I hope it does, but that's an assumption that we're making. And in the past, it hasn't. And I don't understand where the amount that Vice President Stewart mentioned of $220. It's depending on the assessed value of the property. So it's going to fluctuate depending on what the tax assessor's assessment is of that property. It could be $450, it could be $500, it could be $80. I'm not quite sure, but I'm not sure where you got that amount from the first place. The other thing is that we're also looking at starting our own foundation, which offers another resource for generating funds. And I think as being stewards of our funds and for the public and our taxpayers, showing responsibility and other options is going to be seen more positively than burdening them with additional taxes for years to come. The other thing too is that I've been already approached just when they saw this on the agenda. Many community members have approached me that they don't want another bond. And some of them are our local teachers. So I leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. I. Hessen. So just to respond to that before I kick it over to Vice President Stewart, I understand the arguments that my colleagues are making, and I appreciate those thoughts and those considerations. But it does feel like those are very valid considerations for our residents to make their decision and have that discussion. But we're board members here wanting to make the best decision for our district, and it just begs the question: is a bond in this district going to be better for our kids and educating them? Is it going to support that? And I think that's the question we ultimately need to answer ourselves as board members. And the considerations of residents, and we're all residents of our district, that's a decision that we get to make come election day. And I think it's a very important discussion, and I do appreciate those thoughts because they are valid. But I think from our perspective as board members, is it a good thing and the best decision for our kids? And I believe that answer is very clear. So that's what I'd say about that. Thank you for waiting, Vice President Stewart.
Yeah, I just had a few comments, President Critchfield. 1.75 million, I get it. There's some donations for $1,750,000. That is not $112 million that could possibly be matched 60-40. So there's no comparison in those two amounts. Two, you're talking about the burden of the voters. That's me. I am one of the voters that lives here, and you're basically choosing my burden for me. If I want to pay $250 a year or $800 a year or whatever, I should get to make that choice. You're basically saying it's a burden when I've talked to some people that are for the bond and against it as well. But there are people that are for this bond. They should be the ones to make the decision. And you talk about a foundation. I don't have the exact numbers, but I did a lot of research on these foundations when we started them. And I think ABC, they make a couple $100,000 a year. Again, that's not $112 million. So I like the comparisons, but I just don't think those are very good comparisons because they're not even remotely close to a bond and a possible matching bond. And again, yes, maybe that bond doesn't pass, but if it does, and we don't put this on the table for our voters to decide, then I implore the public to come start speaking because you elect people to represent you. So come and start speaking at the board meetings about what you would like to see because that vote's going to be in a few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Stewart. And one final, again, the ideas and initiatives brought up by my colleagues, Ms. Armstrong and Dr. Hessen, are very valid things, but in my opinion, those are year-round things. Those are in addition to. Those are things like, so for a foundation, we have shown the initiative and we have put an effort to start that so we can get more support, directed towards certain things, but finding grants, and our staff has been great at finding those monies and bringing those opportunities to the table. That's a year-round thing. That doesn't stop. Just because we get a bond doesn't mean that stops. Those things will keep happening. It's not either or. This is specifically for our facilities and improving our schools. So come, November, our neighboring districts aren't all, building new buildings and improving their sites for all their students. And when we talk about declining enrollment, if we want students to stay here and we want to attract new students, then not having those improvements when our neighboring districts do is not going to help that. Our role here on the board is to service our students and make sure that their interests are first. I understand not wanting to pay taxes, but that's the least of my concerns when I sit at this dais. It's what's best for the kids in our school district. And I would just implore respectfully all my colleagues to have that in mind when we're discussing this and deciding how to move forward, because I think it's the most important thing that we should be considering from this. And then in the ballot box, you make your own decision there. But here I would just hope that we're unified in the fact that we make decisions based on what's best for the kids. Any other question? I'm going to close the meeting out here, but I really do appreciate the conversation from everybody tonight. I think it's important. All right. If there's no objection, this meeting is adjourned at 5:53 p.m. until the regularly scheduled board meeting to be held on Thursday, August 8th, 2024. Have a good night, everyone.